Caleb Turner dropped a gold coin on the station counter so hard the glass cracked. Every man in that depot went silent. The woman behind him, dust on her dress, tears she refused to let fall, hadn't asked him for anything. She'd only whispered 5 words to the ticket clerk. "I have no ticket home." And Sheriff Doyle Mercer had laughed. That laugh cost Caleb everything he'd built in Cedar Creek. But he'd do it again. If you want to hear how one gold coin started a war and built a love story that changed a town forever, subscribe, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The noon train screamed into Cedar Creek like something wounded. Caleb Turner pulled his horse to a stop outside the depot. He hadn't planned on being here. His fence line needed mending. His cattle needed water. Summer in New Mexico territory didn't forgive laziness, and the sun was already brutal enough to blister a man's neck through his collar. But the feed store was out of wire, and the depot was the only place to send a telegraph for more. He swung down from the saddle, looped the reins around the post, and tipped his hat low against the glare. That's when he heard it. Not crying, something worse. A woman's voice, steady, quiet, and completely destroyed. "I have no ticket home." Caleb stopped walking. The ticket clerk, a thin man named Hargrove, with ink-stained fingers and no patience for anybody, leaned forward on his elbows. "Then you ain't got a problem I can solve, miss." She stood at the counter with a single carpetbag at her feet. Her dress was gray with trail dust. Her gloves were torn at the fingertips. She wasn't young enough to be a girl, and wasn't old enough to have given up. But something in the way she held her shoulders said she was close. "I was told there would be arrangements," she said. "A man named James Dawson was to meet me. We had a written agreement." Hargrove snorted. "Dawson's dead. Fever took him 3 weeks back. Didn't nobody tell you?" She didn't move, didn't flinch. But her hands pressed flat against the counter, like the wood was the only thing keeping her standing. "No," she said. "Nobody told me." A chair scraped behind Caleb. He turned halfway. Sheriff Doyle Mercer was leaning against the far wall with his boots crossed, and his badge catching the light like he'd polished it that morning, just so folks would remember who wore it. "Another mail-order disappointment," Mercer said, loud enough for every man in the depot to hear. "That's the 3rd one this year." 2 men near the window laughed. Caleb didn't. The woman turned slowly. She looked at Mercer the way a person looks at something they've seen before. A type of man. A type of cruelty. Not surprised. Just tired of it. "I am not a mail-order bride," she said. "I'm a school teacher. I was hired through correspondence to work in this territory." Mercer pushed off the wall and walked toward her. He moved the way men move when they know nobody's going to stop them. "School teacher." He said the word like it tasted bad. "Well, miss, this ain't Philadelphia. Out here, a woman alone with no money and no man is what we call a vagrant. And I don't allow vagrants in my town." Caleb's jaw tightened. The woman, he didn't know her name yet, lifted her chin. "I am not a vagrant, sir. I am stranded. There is a difference." "Not to the law, there ain't." Mercer smiled. It was the kind of smile that made decent people look away. "Now, I can put you up at Grady's saloon. He's always looking for help. Or you can wait for the next train east, which ain't coming for 11 days. Your choice." "Those are not choices," she said quietly. "They're the only ones you got." Caleb had heard enough. He stepped forward. His boots hit the floorboards hard enough that Mercer turned. They knew each other. Every man in Cedar Creek knew every other man. Caleb ran a small ranch east of town. He didn't owe anyone money, didn't start fights, and didn't talk much. Mercer had learned to leave him alone. mostly because there was nothing to gain from bothering him. Until now. Caleb reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a gold coin, a $20 piece, heavy and bright, and set it on the counter in front of Hargrove. The sound it made was louder than it should have been. "For her ticket," Caleb said. "Whenever the next train comes." The depot went dead quiet. Hargrove looked at the coin, looked at Caleb, looked at Mercer. Mercer's smile disappeared. "That's generous of you, Turner," the sheriff said. "Real generous. But last I checked, you ain't her husband, her father, or her employer. So what exactly makes her your business?" Caleb looked at him. "She said she's stranded. You offered her a saloon or the street." "That ain't law, Mercer. That's something else." A muscle jumped in Mercer's jaw. The two men near the window stopped laughing. "Careful," Mercer said. "You just bought yourself attention you don't want." "Wouldn't be the first time." They stared at each other for 3 full seconds. In Cedar Creek, that was long enough to mean something. Mercer broke first. He tugged his hat brim, turned, and walked out of the depot without another word. But the way he moved, slow, deliberate, like a man memorizing a debt, told Caleb this wasn't over. The door banged shut behind him. Caleb turned to the woman. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not gratitude, not fear. Something harder than both. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. I don't accept charity from strangers." "It ain't charity. It's a ticket." She studied him the way a person studies something they're trying to decide whether to trust. It took a long time. "My name is Abigail Hart," she said finally. "I came from Philadelphia. I was hired by correspondents to teach at a settlement school near Dawson's Ranch. The agreement was legitimate. I have the letters." "I believe you." "You don't even know me." "Don't need to. Mercer wanted to put you in a saloon. That tells me everything I need to know about whose side I'm on." Something shifted in her face, just barely, like a crack in a wall that's been holding too long. "The next train is 11 days, she said. "I heard." "I have nowhere to stay." Caleb nodded. He'd already thought about that, and he already knew the answer wasn't his ranch. Not because he didn't have room, because a single woman staying with a single man in this territory would give Mercer exactly the ammunition he wanted. "Margaret Hale runs a boarding house on the north end of town," he said. "She's a widow. Good woman. She'll take you in." "And who pays for that?" "I do." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I was stranded once too, and somebody helped me. That's the only reason I'm standing here." Abigail Hart didn't cry. She didn't thank him with trembling words or fall against his chest the way women did in the dime novels that came through on the supply wagons. She picked up her carpetbag, straightened her torn gloves, and said, "Then take me to Mrs. Hale, and I will find a way to repay every cent." "You don't owe me anything." "I owe myself everything. That's why I'll pay." Margaret Hale opened her door before Caleb knocked. She was a stout woman in her 60s, with silver hair pinned tight, and hands that had buried a husband, raised 4 children alone, and built the only boarding house in Cedar Creek that didn't smell like tobacco and regret. "I saw Mercer walking out of the depot, looking like someone stole his supper," she said. "I figured you were involved." "Margaret, this is Miss Abigail Hart. She needs a room." Margaret looked at Abigail, then at the carpetbag, then at the dust on her dress. "How long?" 11 days, until the next eastbound train." "And who's paying?" "I am," Caleb said. Margaret's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, with understanding. "Come in, child," she said to Abigail. "I've got stew on, and you look like you haven't eaten since Missouri." Abigail stepped inside. She paused at the threshold and looked back at Caleb. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." Caleb. "Thank you, Caleb." He touched his hat brim and turned to leave. Margaret caught his arm. "Mercer won't let this go," she said quietly. "You know that." "I know." "That girl's got no protection, no family here, no legal standing. If he decides to push vagrancy charges—" "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because I'll be here." Margaret studied him the way she studied everything, with the careful patience of a woman who'd survived more than most men could imagine. "You be careful, Caleb Turner. Last man who stood up to Doyle Mercer lost his store. The one before that lost his water rights." "I ain't got a store, and my water comes from a well I dug myself." "You got a ranch. That's enough for him to take." Caleb looked at the closed door where Abigail had disappeared. "Some things are worth the risk, Margaret." "That's what they all say. Right before the cost comes due." He rode home in the late afternoon heat, and the desert stretched out like something God had forgotten to finish. His ranch sat in a shallow valley where a creek ran most of the year. Not much. A house, a barn, a corral, and 40 head of cattle that kept him fed and solvent. He'd built it from nothing after the war. Every fence post, every beam, every nail driven by his own hands, because there was nobody else to do it. He'd been 21 at Antietam. Saw things a man shouldn't have to carry. Came west because the east felt like a graveyard with curtains on the windows. Now he was 36, alone. Not lonely. He'd made peace with that years ago. But alone. And today he'd put himself between a woman and a sheriff. And something in the back of his mind told him that the life he'd built was about to get complicated in ways he couldn't fence out. 3 days passed. Caleb came into town for supplies. That was his excuse. The truth was, he wanted to make sure Mercer hadn't made trouble. He found Abigail sitting on Margaret's porch with a book in her lap, and a look on her face like she was trying to solve a problem that didn't have an answer. "Miss Hart." "Mr. Turner." "Caleb," she corrected herself. "Sit down. Mrs. Hale made coffee." He sat on the step below her, took off his hat. The heat pressed down on both of them like a hand. "Any trouble?" he asked. "Define trouble." "Mercer. He walked past yesterday, looked at me, didn't speak. But the way he looked—" She paused. "I've been looked at that way before, by men who think silence is the same as patience. It ain't patience, it's calculation." "I know." They were quiet for a moment. A hot wind pushed dust down the street. "Can I ask you something?" Abigail said. "Go ahead." "Why did you do it? And don't say because someone helped you once. That's a reason, but it's not the whole reason." Caleb turned the hat in his hands. "You want the truth?" "I always want the truth." "Because Mercer's been running this town like his personal property for 6 years, and nobody says a word. They're scared, or they owe him, or they just don't care anymore. When I saw him standing over you in that depot, offering you a saloon like it was a favor—" He stopped. "Something in me just broke." "Broke how?" "Broke like I couldn't be one of the quiet ones anymore." Abigail looked at him for a long time. "That's a dangerous way to feel in a town like this." "I know it." "And you did it anyway." "Yes, ma'am." She almost smiled. Almost. It was the closest thing to warmth he'd seen on her face since the depot. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. "Ain't much to tell. 40 head, a creek, a house I built myself that leaks when the wind blows wrong." "Do you have books?" "A few. Bible. Some Shakespeare I picked up in Santa Fe. A veterinary manual. Shakespeare? She raised an eyebrow. Which plays? Hamlet, The Tempest. Have you read them? He hesitated. Some. I read slow. Didn't have much schooling before the war, and after, well, there wasn't time. Something changed in her eyes. Not pity. He'd have hated pity. Something more like recognition. I could help with that, she said, if you wanted. You offering to teach me? I'm a teacher. It's what I do. And since I can't teach children right now, I might as well teach a cowboy. He laughed. It surprised both of them. Fair enough, Miss Hart. Abigail. Fair enough, Abigail. She started the next day. They sat on Margaret's porch in the early morning before the heat became punishing. Abigail brought the Shakespeare. Caleb brought coffee. She didn't teach the way he expected. She didn't correct him like a schoolmarm with a ruler. She read a line, then asked him what he thought it meant, and then listened like his answer mattered. To be or not to be, Caleb read slowly. That is the question. What do you think Hamlet's really asking? Whether it's worth it, staying alive when everything hurts. Abigail went still. Yes, she said softly. That's exactly what he's asking. I knew men like that. In the war. Men who couldn't figure out why they survived when better men didn't. And what did you tell them? Nothing. There wasn't anything to say. You just stood next to them and hoped it was enough. She looked down at the book. Sometimes it is enough, she said. Sometimes standing next to someone is the only thing that keeps them from falling. They didn't say anything else for a while. They didn't need to. On the 5th day, the trouble came. Caleb was loading supplies into his wagon when he heard the shout. He turned and saw 3 men standing outside Margaret's boarding house. Cowboys from one of the larger ranches, loud, drunk on mid-afternoon whiskey, and bored in the way that makes men dangerous. Abigail was on the porch. "Come on down, school teacher," one of them hollered. "We heard you're looking for a husband. We'll take turns." The second one laughed. "Mercer says you're available. That true?" Abigail stood very still. She held a book against her chest, like a shield. "I suggest you gentlemen move along," she said. Her voice didn't shake, but Caleb could see her hands. "Or what? You gonna read us a lesson?" More laughter. Caleb crossed the street. He didn't run. He walked, slow and steady, the way a man walks when he wants everyone watching to understand that what happens next is a choice, not an accident. The 3 cowboys saw him coming. The loudest one, a big man with a red face and a hat pushed back on his head, grinned. "Turner, this ain't your affair." "It is now." "Sheriff says she's a vagrant, no husband, no employment, no legal right to—" "Sheriff says a lot of things. Most of 'em ain't true." The grin faded. Caleb stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be heard without raising his voice. "You boys got work to do. I suggest you go do it." "And if we don't?" Caleb's hand rested on his belt, not on his gun, just near it. The difference mattered. "Then we're going to have a conversation none of us want to have." The silence stretched. The big cowboy looked at his friends. They looked at the ground. "This ain't over, Turner." "It never is. Go home." They left. Not fast, but they left. Caleb turned to the porch. Abigail was still standing there. The book was still pressed to her chest. "You're shaking," he said. "I know. It's all right to be scared." "I'm not scared." She lowered the book. Her eyes were bright and fierce. "I'm angry. I'm angry that I came 1,000 miles to build a life, and I can't walk to the well without being treated like property." "You're right to be angry." "Anger doesn't protect me, Caleb. It just makes them enjoy it more." He took off his hat. "Then we find something that does protect you." "Like what?" "Like a reason to stay that even Mercer can't argue with." She frowned. "What kind of reason?" "A job. A real one. With a contract and a wage. If you're employed, he can't charge you with vagrancy. That's the law, even out here." "And who's going to employ a woman they don't know in a town that answers to the sheriff?" Caleb looked at her. "I need someone to keep my books. Ranch accounts, cattle records. I can barely read my own ledger." "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a legal shield. The job just happens to be real." Abigail stared at him. "You keep doing this," she said. "Doing what?" "Putting yourself between me and the fire." "Somebody has to." "No, that's the thing. Nobody has to. That's what makes it matter." She set the book down on the porch railing. "I'll take the job," she said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "I work at Mrs. Hale's, not at your ranch. You bring the ledgers to me. Everything stays professional. I will not give Mercer or anyone else a reason to question my reputation." "Agreed." "And I keep track of every dollar you've spent on me. The ticket, the boarding, the wage. When I can, I pay it back." "That ain't necessary." "It's necessary to me. I will not be a debt someone collects on." He looked at her. This woman who'd come 1,000 miles to a dead man's promise, who'd been laughed at and threatened and cornered, and who still stood on that porch like she owned it. "All right," he said. "We do it your way." "Good." She picked the book back up. "Now go home, Caleb. I have a lesson to prepare." "A lesson for who?" "For you. Tomorrow morning. Hamlet, Act 3. He put his hat on and almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." He drove the wagon home through the long amber light of evening, and the desert was quiet except for the creak of wheels and the sound of his own breathing. He thought about what Margaret had said. Last man who stood up to Mercer lost his store. He thought about the gold coin on the counter. He thought about the way Abigail Hart's voice sounded when she said, "I will not be a debt someone collects on." And he thought about the war, about standing in smoke and fire next to men who were terrified but didn't run. Not because they weren't afraid, because they decided that some things mattered more than fear. He'd forgotten that feeling. Abigail Hart had reminded him. And Doyle Mercer, polishing his badge, tallying his debts, watching from whatever shadow he'd chosen tonight, was about to learn what happened when a quiet man stopped being quiet. The summer heat pressed down on Cedar Creek like a hand over a flame. Something was about to burn. The ledgers arrived the next morning. Caleb set them on Margaret's kitchen table without ceremony. 3 battered notebooks held together with string and stubbornness. He stepped back like a man handing over evidence at trial. Abigail opened the first one and stopped breathing. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "This isn't bookkeeping. This is... I don't even know what this is." "It's my system." "You don't have a system. You have chaos with occasional numbers." She turned a page. "Is this a 7 or a 1? "Depends on the day. You've been running a ranch on this?" 40 head of cattle are still alive, so I must be doing something right." She closed the book and looked at him with an expression that sat somewhere between horror and admiration. "I'm going to need more coffee," she said. Margaret set a pot between them without being asked. "I've seen those ledgers," Margaret said. "I told him 2 years ago he needed help. He said he'd figure it out." I was figuring it out. You were guessing, Caleb. There's a difference. Abigail pulled a pencil from her bag and opened the first notebook again. Sit down. We're starting from the beginning. I need to understand every number in here, and you're going to explain them to me even if it takes all morning. He sat. It took all morning. By noon, she had reorganized 3 months of cattle records onto fresh pages in handwriting so clean it looked like it belonged in a bank. Caleb watched her work and realized something that made his chest tight. She was good at this. Not just capable, gifted. The way her mind sorted numbers and found patterns was the same way his hands knew how to mend a fence or gentle a spooked horse. It was built into her. You wasted in a schoolhouse, he said. She didn't look up. Teaching isn't a waste. I didn't mean it that way. I know what you meant. She set the pencil down. My father was an accountant in Philadelphia. He taught me numbers before he taught me letters. Said a woman who could count her own money would never have to ask a man to count it for her. Smart man. He was. He died owing nothing to anyone. That was his greatest pride. Is that why the debt bothers you? The money I spent? She looked up now. It bothers me because I've seen what happens when a woman owes a man something she can't name. The debt starts as money. Then it becomes expectation. Then obligation. Then ownership. That ain't what this is. I know, but I need to be sure. Not of you. Of myself. Caleb held her gaze. Then be sure, he said. Take all the time you need. Margaret watched this exchange from the stove and said nothing, but the look on her face said plenty. That afternoon, Caleb rode back to the ranch. He was halfway home when he saw the fence. Cut. Clean through. 3 sections of wire, sliced with something sharp and deliberate. His cattle had wandered through the gap and were scattered across the open range. It would take him the rest of the day to round them up. He knelt beside the cut wire and ran his thumb along the edge. Not frayed, not broken by weather or animal. Cut by a man with a tool and a purpose. Mercer. Not directly. Mercer never did anything directly. He had men. He had favors owed. He had a whole town trained to do his bidding and pretend it was their own idea. Caleb stood up, looked east toward Cedar Creek, and said nothing. He spent 6 hours in the heat gathering cattle. By the time he got them back through the mended fence, his hands were raw and his shirt was soaked through. He sat on the porch of his house and drank water from a tin cup and thought about what Margaret had warned him. Last man who stood up to Mercer lost his store. The one before that lost his water rights. Now fences. Next it would be something bigger. He knew how men like Mercer worked. They didn't come at you head on. They wore you down. Cut a fence here. Spoil a well there. Spread a rumor. Turn a neighbor. Squeeze until a man decided it wasn't worth the fight. Caleb finished his water. It was worth the fight. He rode back to town the next morning, earlier than usual. Abigail was already on the porch with the ledgers. You look terrible, she said. Someone cut my fence last night. Lost 6 hours rounding up cattle. Her hands stopped moving. Mercer? Can't prove it. Don't need to. We both know. Because of me. Because of him. You didn't cut my fence, Abigail. But I'm the reason. You're the excuse. The reason is that Mercer runs this town by fear, and I stopped being afraid. That's on me, not you. She set the ledger down. What are you going to do? Fix the fence. Keep working. Same as always. That's not a plan. That's stubbornness. Out here, stubbornness is a plan. She almost laughed. Almost. Then her face went serious again. "He came by last night," she said. Caleb's whole body went still. "Mercer?" "After supper. He stood outside the boarding house, didn't come in, didn't say anything. Just stood there for 10 minutes, then walked away." "Margaret see him?" "She's the one who told me. She said he does that, stands outside places, lets people know he's watching." "She's right. It's what he does." "It worked. I didn't sleep." Caleb leaned forward. "Listen to me. He wants you scared. That's the whole game. If you're scared, you leave. If you leave, I'm alone again, and he wins. Don't give him that." "I'm not giving him anything. But I'm not foolish either. A woman alone in this territory, with a man like that circling?" She stopped. "I've read enough history to know how this ends. This ain't history. This is now. And I'm telling you, he won't touch you." "You can't promise that." "I just did." Their eyes locked across the table. The morning was already hot, and the coffee had gone cold between them. And something in that moment shifted. Not toward romance, not yet, but toward trust. The kind of trust that costs something. The kind you can't take back. "Teach me something," Caleb said. "What?" "Anything. Teach me something. I need to think about something other than fences and sheriffs." She picked up the Shakespeare. "Hamlet, Act 3, she said. "The play within the play." "What's that about?" "A man who uses a story to reveal the truth about someone powerful. He can't accuse the king directly, so he stages a play that mirrors the king's crime and watches for a reaction." Caleb stared at her. "That's clever." "It's more than clever. It's strategic. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun. It's a mirror." He thought about that for a long time. On the 7th day, Abigail asked to see the ranch. "It's not proper," Caleb said. "You said so yourself. Everything stays professional." "I said I wouldn't stay at your ranch. I didn't say I couldn't visit it to do my job. I need to see the cattle to match them against your records. Half the numbers in this ledger don't correspond to anything I can verify." He couldn't argue with that. They rode out together in the early morning. Caleb put her on his gentlest mare, and she sat the saddle like someone who'd been taught once and remembered more than she expected. "You've ridden before," he said. "My father took me riding in Fairmount Park when I was 12. I fell off twice and got back on 3 times. That math don't add up. The 3rd time was by choice. I wanted to prove I could." He smiled. A real one. The kind that cracked through the dust and the wariness and the years of keeping to himself. The ranch was quiet. Just cattle, wind, and the creak of the windmill Caleb had built 2 summers ago. He showed her the herd, pointing out the brands and the markings, and she wrote everything down with the precision of a woman who believed that details were the difference between surviving and drowning. "You've built something real here," she said, looking across the land. "It ain't much." "It's yours. You built it with your own hands. That's more than most people can say." "You sound like you admire it." "I admire anyone who builds something from nothing. I was trying to do the same thing. Come west, start a school, make something that mattered." She paused. "Dawson's death took that away." "Did it?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Dawson's dead. The marriage arrangement is gone. But you're still here. You're still a teacher. The only thing that's changed is the plan. The plan was everything. Plans change, people don't. Not the ones who matter." Abigail turned away, but not before he saw something in her eyes that she didn't want him to see. Something raw and unguarded and close to breaking. "We should get back," she said, "before anyone sees us out here alone." "Abigail, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't be kind to me right now. I can handle cruelty. I've practiced. Kindness undoes me." He nodded. He understood that better than she knew. They rode back in silence, and the silence was full of things neither of them was ready to say. That evening, Margaret was waiting on the porch with her arms crossed and a look on her face that meant trouble had come calling. "What happened?" Caleb asked, before he'd even dismounted. "Grady came by, from the saloon." "What did he want?" "He said Mercer's filing vagrancy charges against Miss Hart. Formal ones. Before the circuit judge, who comes through next week." Abigail's hands tightened on the reins. "He can't," she said. "I have employment. Caleb hired me. I have a contract." "Written?" Margaret asked. Silence. Caleb swore under his breath. They'd agreed on the job, shaken hands, but there was nothing on paper. "We'll write one tonight," he said. "It has to be dated before the charge," Margaret said. "If the contract is dated after the complaint, the judge will throw it out. He'll say it's manufactured." "Then we date it the day I hired her." "That's fraud, Caleb." "It's the truth. I hired her 5 days ago. We just didn't write it down." "The truth and what you can prove in front of a judge are two different things. You know that." Abigail dismounted slowly. She stood in the dust between the horse and the porch, and her face had the look of someone doing very hard arithmetic with very bad numbers. "What happens if the charges go through?" she asked. Margaret's voice was careful. "The judge can order you to find employment within 48 hours, or face removal from the territory. If Mercer's the one presenting the case, he'll argue you've been here over a week with no verifiable income." "I have income. Caleb pays me." "From your pocket or from the ranch account?" Margaret looked at Caleb. He didn't answer. Because the answer was his pocket. Cash. No record, no receipt, nothing a judge would accept. "This is what he does," Margaret said quietly. "He doesn't break the law. He uses it. He finds the cracks and pushes people through them." Abigail sat down on the porch step. She pressed her palms together and held them against her mouth. "I need to think," she said. "We'll figure this. I said I need to think. Please." Caleb stepped back. He looked at Margaret. She shook her head. Let her be. He walked to his horse, untied the reins, stood there. "Caleb," Abigail's voice, small but steady. He turned. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever Mercer does, whatever the judge says, I'm not running." "I know." "No, you don't. You think I'm scared and trying to be brave. I'm not. I'm furious, and I'm going to fight this. But I need to do it my way." "And what's your way?" "The Hamlet way." She looked up at him. "A mirror." He didn't understand, not yet, but something in her voice told him she did, and that was enough. He rode home in the dark. The stars over New Mexico were so thick they looked like a wound in the sky, letting light bleed through. He thought about the contract they should have written, about the judge coming next week, about Mercer filing paperwork while his fences got cut, and he thought about Abigail sitting on that step with her hands pressed together like a woman praying. Except she wasn't praying. She was planning. 2 days before the circuit judge was due, Caleb woke to pounding on his door. He grabbed his rifle and opened it to find Billy Dawson, James Dawson's 17-year-old nephew, skinny as a post and twice as nervous, standing in the pre-dawn gray. "Mr. Turner, you need to come to town." "Why?" "Miss Hart's in trouble. Mercer locked up the boarding house." "What do you mean, locked it up?" "He nailed a quarantine notice on the door. Says Mrs. Hale's got typhoid. Nobody in, nobody out." Caleb was on his horse in 3 minutes. He rode hard, and the desert blurred past him in the blue light before sunrise. By the time he reached Cedar Creek, a small crowd had gathered outside Margaret's boarding house. A yellow quarantine notice was nailed to the door. Margaret's voice was coming through the window, sharp and furious. "There is no typhoid in this house, and you know it, Doyle Mercer." Mercer stood on the porch with his arms folded. Two of his deputies flanked the door. "The law requires quarantine when there's a report of infectious disease," Mercer said. He sounded almost bored. "I received a report. I acted. If you want to dispute it, you can take it up with the judge when he arrives." "The judge who you appointed? The judge who owes you money?" "Careful, Mrs. Hale. That sounds like slander." Caleb swung down from his horse and pushed through the crowd. "Open that door, Mercer." The sheriff turned, smiled, that same smile from the depot. "Turner, right on time. You know, I was wondering when you'd show up." "Open the door." "Can't do that. Quarantine's a public health matter. Even I can't override it once the notice is posted." "There's no typhoid." "A concerned citizen reported symptoms. I'm duty-bound to investigate. Miss Hart and Miss Hale will remain inside until the judge can assess the situation." "And when's that?" 2 days, same time as the vagrancy hearing." Mercer leaned in. "Convenient, isn't it?" Caleb's hand moved toward his belt. "Don't," Mercer said softly. "You pull that gun and I arrest you. Then who protects your schoolteacher?" The crowd was watching. Every face, every eye. Caleb could feel them. Some sympathetic, some afraid. Most just waiting to see what happened so they could pick the winning side. "This ain't law," Caleb said. "This is a cage." "This is Cedar Creek. Same thing." A voice came from inside the boarding house. Clear, controlled, carrying across the porch and into the street, like it was meant for every person standing there. "Sheriff Mercer." Everyone turned toward the window. Abigail stood behind the glass with her hands at her sides and her chin raised. "You have quarantined this house to prevent me from attending my own vagrancy hearing. If I cannot appear, I cannot defend myself. If I cannot defend myself, you win by default. That is not law. That is cowardice." The murmur that went through the crowd was quiet, but Caleb heard it, and so did Mercer. "Miss Hart, I suggest you listen. I have a written contract of employment with Mr. Caleb Turner, dated 5 days ago, witnessed by Mrs. Margaret Hale. I have receipts showing wages received for legitimate work. I have correspondence from the Philadelphia Board of Education confirming my certification as a teacher. And I have a letter from James Dawson, your dead citizen, offering me a position in this territory." Silence. "All of these documents are in this house, with me, behind your quarantine notice. If the judge arrives and I am unable to present them, I will write to the territorial governor's office. I will write to every newspaper between here and Santa Fe, and I will make certain that the name Doyle Mercer becomes the answer to a very specific question." "And what question is that?" Mercer's voice had gone flat. "What happens when a man with a badge is afraid of a woman with a pencil?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Caleb looked at Mercer's face and saw something he'd never seen there before. Not fear, not yet, but the beginning of it. The moment when a man who's always controlled the game realizes someone else knows the rules better than he does. Mercer stepped off the porch. 2 days, Miss Hart," he said. "We'll see what the judge thinks of your paperwork." He walked away. His deputies followed. The crowd parted for them and closed again. And the whispers started before Mercer reached the end of the street. Caleb moved to the window. Abigail was still standing there. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the windowsill to stop it. "You wrote a contract?" he asked quietly. "Last night." Margaret witnessed it. I backdated it to the day you offered me the job. That's the truth. We agreed. We shook hands. I simply put it on paper after the fact. And the receipts? Margaret keeps records of every payment that comes through this house. Your boarding money for me is documented. And the letter to the governor? A pause. I haven't written it yet, but he doesn't know that. Caleb stared at her through the glass. This woman, who'd arrived in Cedar Creek with a torn carpet bag and no ticket home, had just backed down the most powerful man in town with nothing but words and a window. Abigail. Yes? When this is over, remind me never to argue with you. Her hands stopped shaking, and for the first time since the depot, she smiled. Not almost, not nearly. A real smile that reached her eyes and broke something open in Caleb's chest that he'd kept locked since the war. I'll add it to the contract, she said. He laughed, and the people still standing in the street heard it, and some of them smiled too. And something shifted in Cedar Creek that morning, small and quiet, like a crack in a dam. Not enough to break anything yet, but enough to let the light through. The quarantine notice stayed nailed to Margaret's door for 2 days. Caleb didn't leave town. He slept in the livery stable with his horse and his rifle, and the kind of shallow, wary sleep that soldiers learn when the ground could shift beneath them any minute. He wasn't afraid. Fear had a shape he recognized from the war, cold and tight and sitting in the pit of his stomach like a stone. This was different. This was anger held on a very short leash. Every few hours he walked past the boarding house. Sometimes Abigail was at the window, sometimes Margaret. Once, neither of them appeared, and his heart hammered until he heard Margaret's voice through the wall, scolding someone about wasting flour. On the morning of the hearing, Billy Dawson found him at the livery. "Mr. Turner, the judge is here." "Where?" "Saloon. Mercer set up a table in the back room. Says it's the only place big enough." A saloon. Caleb pulled on his boots. He's holding a legal hearing in a saloon. "Yes, sir." "And the quarantine?" "Still up. Mercer says he'll escort Miss Hart under guard. For public safety." Caleb grabbed his hat. Under guard. Like a prisoner. "That's what Mrs. Hale said. She used stronger words." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Then he walked out into the morning heat and headed for the saloon. The back room of Grady's saloon smelled like spilled whiskey and old smoke. Someone had dragged a table to the center and set 3 chairs behind it, 1 for the judge, 2 for show. The rest of the room was standing only, and it was already half full by the time Caleb arrived. He recognized most of the faces. Ranchers, shopkeepers, the blacksmith, a few cowboys from the larger outfits, people who had no legal reason to be here, but who'd come anyway, because Cedar Creek didn't get many shows. And Doyle Mercer, putting a woman on trial, was the best entertainment since the 4th of July dance. The judge was a man named Alton Birch, 50-ish, thin hair, spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. He traveled a circuit through 4 towns, and his reputation depended on who you asked. Fair-minded, some said. Others said he owed Mercer a gambling debt from 3 years back and had never quite paid it off. Caleb positioned himself near the front, close enough to be seen. Mercer entered through the side door. He'd put on a clean shirt and combed his hair, and his badge gleamed like he'd spit-shined it for the occasion. He nodded to the judge. The judge nodded back. The kind of nod that made Caleb's stomach tighten. Then the front door opened. Abigail walked in. She wore the same gray dress she'd arrived in, but Margaret had cleaned and pressed it so that the fabric looked almost new. Her hair was pinned up. Her gloves were mended. She carried a leather folder against her chest. The documents, Caleb guessed. She held them the way a soldier holds a weapon, going into a fight he didn't choose but intends to win. Two of Mercer's deputies walked behind her, not touching her, just close enough to make a point. She crossed the room without looking at anyone, without hurrying, without a single wasted movement. She stopped in front of the judge's table and stood there with her back straight and her chin level. The room went quiet. Judge Birch cleared his throat. This is an informal hearing regarding vagrancy charges filed against one Abigail Hart, lately of Philadelphia, currently residing in Cedar Creek. Sheriff Mercer, state your case. Mercer stood. He hooked his thumbs in his belt and addressed the room more than the judge. Your Honor, this woman arrived in Cedar Creek 11 days ago with no money, no employment, and no legal guardian. She was brought here under a mail-order marriage arrangement with a man who subsequently died. Since that time, she has been living on the charity of others without verifiable income or occupation. Under territorial statute, that constitutes vagrancy. He paused. Let the words sit. I bear Miss Hart no ill will, but the law is the law, and my duty is to this town. A few men nodded. Not many, but enough. Judge Birch turned to Abigail. Miss Hart, you may respond. Abigail opened the leather folder. Your Honor, I have 4 documents I'd like to present. Go ahead. First, a letter from the Philadelphia Board of Education confirming my certification as a teacher, dated March of this year. She placed it on the table. Second, a letter from James Dawson, now deceased, offering me a teaching position at his settlement near Cedar Creek. This letter was received before my departure and constitutes a legitimate employment offer. She placed the second document beside the first. Third, a contract of employment between myself and Caleb Turner, owner of the Turner Ranch, for bookkeeping and accounting services, dated 6 days ago, witnessed by Mrs. Margaret Hale. She placed it down. Fourth, a ledger showing 2 payments received from Mr. Turner for services rendered, recorded by Mrs. Hale in her boarding house accounts. 4 documents, laid out in a row, clean and precise. The room was dead silent. Judge Birch picked up the contract and read it, adjusted his spectacles, read it again. Mercer's jaw worked. Your Honor, Mercer said, that contract is dated after my initial complaint was filed with the territorial office. It's clearly manufactured to— The contract is dated the day the employment began, Abigail said. The complaint was filed 2 days later. If the sheriff had inquired about my circumstances before filing charges, he would have learned I was already employed. I did inquire. I spoke with Mrs. Hale, who said, You stood outside her window at night, Abigail said. That is not an inquiry. That is intimidation. A murmur rippled through the room. Caleb watched the faces, some surprised, some uncomfortable. A few women near the back exchanging glances. Judge Birch held up a hand. Miss Hart, please address the court, not the sheriff. I apologize, Your Honor. I would also like to note for the record that Sheriff Mercer placed a quarantine notice on Mrs. Hale's boarding house 2 days before this hearing, effectively preventing me from traveling freely or seeking additional employment. The quarantine was a public health measure, Mercer said. Has Mrs. Hale or I displayed any symptoms of typhoid? Silence. Has a doctor examined either of us? There is no doctor in Cedar Creek, Mercer said. Then on what medical basis was the quarantine issued? A citizen reported. Which citizen? Mercer's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That information is confidential. There is no confidentiality statute for quarantine reports in New Mexico territory, Abigail said. I checked. Caleb felt something move through the room. Not sound, not movement, something harder to name. A shift. Like the moment in a card game when everyone at the table realizes the hand they thought was losing is actually winning. Judge Birch removed his spectacles and cleaned them. A stalling gesture. A thinking gesture. "Sheriff Mercer," the judge said carefully. "The documents presented by Miss Hart appear to establish both employment and income. The vagrancy statute requires an absence of both. Can you present evidence that these documents are fraudulent?" "The timing is suspicious, Your Honor. Turner hired her the same week. Can you present evidence?" A long pause. "Not at this time. Then I am inclined to dismiss the charges." The room exhaled, but Mercer wasn't finished. "Your Honor, there's another matter." Judge Birch looked annoyed. "What matter?" "The nature of the employment. A single woman, working for a single man, with no chaperone and no oversight. The moral character of the arrangement." "You're questioning my moral character?" Abigail's voice cut through the room like a blade drawn from a sheath. "Sheriff, I work at Mrs. Hale's boarding house. Mr. Turner brings ledgers to me there. I have never set foot on his ranch unaccompanied. Every interaction between us has occurred in the presence of a witness." "That's not what I've heard." "Then your informants are lying. Would you like me to call Mrs. Hale to testify? She's right outside." Mercer looked at the judge. The judge looked at Mercer. "I think we've heard enough," Judge Birch said. "Charges dismissed. Miss Hart, you're free to continue your employment in Cedar Creek." He banged his hand on the table. No gavel, just a palm, and stood up. The room broke into noise. Chairs scraping, voices, movement. Caleb pushed forward to reach Abigail. She was standing exactly where she'd been the entire time. Folder closed, hands steady. But her face was the face of someone who has just survived something and doesn't yet believe it. "You did it," he said. "I did my job. I presented evidence." "You took him apart." "I told the truth. He wasn't prepared for that." Margaret appeared at the door. She'd been standing outside the whole time, listening through the wall. Her eyes were wet, which was something Caleb had never seen in 6 years of knowing her. "Child," Margaret said, and pulled Abigail into her arms. Abigail let herself be held. For 3 seconds. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes once, fast, like she was angry at the tears for existing, and said, "We need to go, before he regroups." "Regroups?" Caleb frowned. The judge dismissed it. The judge dismissed the vagrancy charge. Mercer still has the badge. He still has the deputies. He still controls the telegraph and the supply routes and the water rights for half the ranches in this valley. She looked at him with eyes that were clear and hard and burning. "Caleb, I won a battle, not the war." She was right. He knew she was right. And the fact that she could see it this clearly, this soon, while everyone else was exhaling with relief, told him something about Abigail Hart that he'd suspected since the depot. She wasn't just smart. She was strategic. And she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. They walked back to the boarding house together. The quarantine notice was still nailed to the door. Caleb ripped it down with his bare hands and dropped it in the dirt. "Feel better?" Margaret asked. "Some." Inside, Margaret made coffee and set out biscuits, and the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but wasn't easy either. The kind of silence that follows a storm when you're checking for damage. "He'll come again," Margaret said finally. "Different angle, different weapon, but he'll come." "I know," Abigail said. "What are you going to do?" Abigail wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. The hearing taught me something. Mercer's power comes from isolation. He controls this town because everyone acts alone. The ranchers don't talk to each other. The shopkeepers mind their own business. Nobody stands together because standing together means standing against him. That's how it's been since he took the badge, Margaret said. 6 years. How did he get it? Previous sheriff died. Mercer volunteered. Nobody ran against him. Because they were afraid? Because he was the only one willing to do the job. Or so everyone thought. By the time folks realized what he was, it was too late. He'd already built the machine. Abigail set her cup down. What if someone ran against him? Caleb looked up. What? Not for sheriff. Not yet. For something smaller. A town council. A school board. Any kind of formal governance that divides power instead of concentrating it. Cedar Creek doesn't have a town council, Margaret said. Then it should. Territorial law allows any settlement with more than 50 residents to establish municipal governance. I looked it up in the law books Margaret keeps. Those are her husband's books, Caleb said, from when he was a clerk. They're still valid. The statutes haven't changed. Margaret stared at her. You want to start a town council in a town run by a corrupt sheriff, using law books from my dead husband's shelf? Yes. You've been here less than 2 weeks. Mrs. Hale, I've been fighting men like Mercer my whole life. My father fought the banks in Philadelphia. My mother fought the school board that wanted to fire her for teaching arithmetic to girls. I didn't come west to find a husband. I came west because I was told there was a place where a woman could build something that mattered. And I refuse to believe that place is supposed to look like this. Margaret turned to Caleb. Is she always like this? I've known her 11 days, and yes. Margaret laughed. A real laugh, deep and rough and full of something that might have been hope. All right, Margaret said. All right, child. Tell me what you need. I need names. People who are tired of Mercer, but too afraid to say it. People who've lost something, a store, water rights, a fence. She looked at Caleb. People who've been cut. There are more than you think, Margaret said. Tom Avery lost his mercantile last year. Rebecca Sloane's husband was run off his claim. The Phelps family had their water diverted. Can they be gathered? Not in public. Mercer watches everything. Then not in public. Here, at night. One at a time if necessary. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Abigail, this is dangerous. You're talking about organizing against the most powerful man in the territory. I'm talking about building a government. That's not a crime. It's a right. Mercer won't see it that way. Mercer doesn't get to define what this is. That's the whole point. He looked at her across the table. The same woman who'd stood at a depot counter 11 days ago, with no ticket and no money and no future. The same woman who'd told a sheriff she wasn't for sale. The same woman who'd backed him down through a window. She wasn't the same woman at all. She was becoming something else, something Cedar Creek had never seen. All right, Caleb said. We start tonight. Tonight is too soon. We start when we have enough people to matter. Margaret, how many can you reach in 3 days? 8, maybe 10. That's enough. 10 people who'll sign a petition to the territorial office requesting formal municipal status. Once it's filed, Mercer can't stop it without breaking territorial law. He'll try anyway, Caleb said. Let him try. Every illegal act he commits after a formal petition strengthens our case. Caleb shook his head slowly, not in disagreement, in wonder. You've been thinking about this since the window, he said. Haven't you? I've been thinking about this since the depot. Since Mercer told me no money means no protection. He was right, in a way. Money protects. Power protects. But there's something that protects better than both. What? People. Enough people standing together. That's the only thing men like Mercer can't buy, can't threaten, and can't arrest. Margaret stood up. I'll start tonight. Tom Avery first. He's got the most to gain and the least to lose. Be careful, Abigail said. Child, I've been careful for 63 years. I know how to walk quiet. Margaret put on her shawl and went out. The door closed behind her, and Caleb and Abigail were alone at the table. The room was warm and still and charged with something neither of them named. Caleb. Yeah? I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without responding. All right. She folded her hands, unfolded them, folded them again. I came here to marry a man I'd never met because my life in Philadelphia was over. My father was dead. My savings were gone. The school where I taught closed. I had nothing. Dawson's letter was the only door left open, so I walked through it. She paused. I didn't come here for love. I came here for survival. And when I got off that train and learned Dawson was dead, I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Not with tragedy, with nothing. Just nothing. Her voice cracked, just barely. She caught it and held it. Then you put a gold coin on a counter, and everything changed. Not because of the money, because someone saw me. Not as a problem to solve or a woman to pity. You saw me standing there and you thought, that's wrong. And you did something about it. She looked at him. I need you to know that I'm not staying because of the coin. And I'm not staying because of you. I'm staying because when I stood in that hearing today and I watched Mercer's face when he realized he couldn't control me, I felt something I haven't felt since my father died. What? Power. My own power. Not given, not borrowed. Mine. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, with fire. I will not lose that again, Caleb. For anyone. For anything. Not even for you. He sat with that. Let it settle. Let it fill the space between them with its weight and its truth. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. You might, someday, without meaning to. Men do. I'm not most men. Every man is most men until he proves otherwise. Then let me prove it. She held his gaze for a long time, the kind of time that doesn't measure in seconds, but in decisions. You already are, she said quietly. Every day you bring those ledgers to this table, instead of asking me to come to your ranch. Every time you step back when I ask you to. Every time you listen without fixing. She reached across the table and laid her hand on top of his. Just for a moment. Barely long enough to feel. Then she pulled it back. Now, she said, and her voice was steady again, professional, the teacher and the strategist, and the woman who'd decided that survival wasn't enough. We have work to do. Pull out the ledgers. If we're going to petition for a town council, we need to show the territorial office that Cedar Creek has legitimate commerce. Your ranch records are the foundation. My disaster records. I've cleaned them up. They're presentable. Barely. You really know how to make a man feel good about himself. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to make this work. He opened the ledger. She picked up her pencil, and they worked side by side until the lamps burned low, building the case that would either save Cedar Creek or destroy everything they had. 3 days later, Margaret came back with 11 names. 11 people who'd lost something to Mercer. 11 people willing to sign. Abigail wrote the petition that night by lamplight, in handwriting so precise it looked like it had been typeset. Every word chosen. every clause deliberate. A document that said, in the calm and formal language of territorial law, that Cedar Creek was ready to govern itself. She signed her name first. Margaret signed second. Caleb signed third. Then Tom Avery, Rebecca Sloan, the Phelps family, husband and wife, 2 signatures. Each name was a declaration, a line crossed, a bridge burned. When the last signature was dry, Abigail folded the petition, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to Billy Dawson. "The mail coach leaves at dawn," she said. "This goes to the territorial office in Santa Fe. Don't tell anyone what's in it. Don't stop for anyone. Don't let this out of your hands." Billy nodded. He was 17 and scared and proud all at once. "What if Sheriff Mercer stops me?" "He won't. He doesn't know about this." "Yet," Margaret added. Abigail looked at her. "Yet," she agreed. Billy left through the back door. Caleb watched him disappear into the dark. "How long before the territorial office responds?" he asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. "And how long before Mercer finds out?" Abigail looked at the empty table where 11 people had sat an hour ago. 11 people who'd trusted her. 11 people who now had targets on their backs. "Sooner than that," she said. She was right. Mercer found out in 2 days. And what he did next made everything before it look like a warning shot. Tom Avery's mercantile burned on a Tuesday. Caleb smelled the smoke before he saw it. He was riding into town with the morning ledgers when the black column rose over Cedar Creek like a fist punching through the sky. By the time he reached Main Street, half the town was already standing in the road, watching. The store was gutted. Walls still standing, but everything inside, the shelves, the stock, the counter where Tom had done business for 12 years, was ash. Tom stood across the street with his wife. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just staring at the smoke with the face of a man watching his whole life turn to nothing. Caleb dismounted and walked to him. "Tom." Nothing. "Tom, look at me." Tom Avery turned his head slowly. His eyes were empty. "He did this," Tom said. "You know he did this." "I know. I signed that petition. 3 days later, my store burns. You think that's coincidence?" "No." "Then what are we going to do about it?" Caleb looked at the smoking ruin. Then he looked down the street toward the sheriff's office, where Mercer was leaning against the doorframe with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the fire like it was morning entertainment. "We're going to document everything," Caleb said. "And we're going to keep going." "Keep going? I got nothing left, Caleb. That store was everything I had." "That's what he wants you to think. He wants you to believe that signing your name cost you everything. If you quit now, he wins twice. Once for the store, and once for your name on that petition meaning nothing." Tom's jaw tightened. His wife grabbed his arm. "Tom, please, maybe we should just—" "No." Tom's voice came back from wherever it had gone, hard and raw and shaking. "No. My father built that store. I'm not going to let a man with a tin badge erase it." Caleb gripped his shoulder. "Then don't. We rebuild." "With what?" "With what we've got. Same as always." Abigail arrived 20 minutes later. She took one look at the ruins, one look at Tom Avery's face, and walked straight to Mercer's office. Caleb saw her cross the street, and his stomach dropped. "Abigail, don't!" She didn't stop. He caught up to her 3 steps from Mercer's door. "This is a mistake. This is a conversation. He just burned a man's livelihood to the ground. You think talking will—" "I'm not going to talk. I'm going to listen. And I'm going to watch. Hamlet, Act 3. The Mirror." She walked through the door. Mercer looked up from his desk. His coffee was still steaming. He smiled. "Miss Hart, what a surprise."
"Sheriff Mercer, I wanted to inquire about the fire at Avery's Mercantile."
"Terrible thing. We're looking into it."
"I'm sure you are. Have you identified a cause?"
"Lamp oil. These old buildings, you know. One careless moment and—" He spread his hands. "Tragic."
"Mr. Avery says he wasn't in the building last night."
"Vagrants, maybe. Drifters passing through."
"We get them from time to time. I thought you didn't allow vagrants in your town." Mercer's smile flickered, just for a second, like a lamp catching wind. "Miss Hart, is there something specific I can help you with?" "I'd like to file a report." "A report about what?" "About the fire, on behalf of Mr. Avery, for insurance purposes and for the territorial record." "Avery can file his own report." "He's asked me to do it. I'm his bookkeeper." "Since when?" "Since this morning. He hired me. I have a contract." She placed a piece of paper on Mercer's desk. Caleb, standing in the doorway, felt his heart kick. She'd written it while walking across the street. He was sure of it. Mercer didn't look at the paper. He looked at her. "You're collecting employers like some women collect hats." "I'm collecting clients. It's called business. I believe even Cedar Creek allows that." "You're pushing, Miss Hart. Pushing hard, in a town that doesn't take kindly to outsiders who make noise." "I'm not making noise, Sheriff. I'm making records. There's a difference. Noise fades. Records don't." She turned and walked out, past Caleb without looking at him, crossed the street to where Tom and his wife were still standing. Caleb followed. "What was that?" he asked. "I wanted him to know we're documenting every incident, every act. When the territorial office receives our petition, they'll also receive a file of everything Mercer has done since it was sent. The fire, the quarantine, the cut fences, all of it." "You're building a case." "I'm building a record. The case builds itself." Tom Avery was listening. "You think paper can stop a man like that?" "Paper stopped him at the hearing," Abigail said. "Paper is the only thing that's ever stopped him. Because paper doesn't forget, it doesn't get scared, and it can't be burned twice." Tom looked at the remains of his store. "Mine just was." "Then we make copies, everything in triplicate. One here, one at Margaret's, one sealed and sent to Santa Fe with the next mail coach. That's a lot of writing." "I'm a teacher, Mr. Avery. Writing is what I do." That afternoon, Abigail sat at Margaret's table and wrote for 6 hours straight. She wrote a detailed account of the fire, including testimony from Tom Avery, his wife, and 3 neighbors who confirmed no lamps were left burning. She wrote a timeline of Mercer's actions since her arrival: the depot confrontation, the vagrancy threats, the quarantine, the saloon hearing. She cross-referenced dates with names and actions. She created a document so thorough, so precise, so damning that Margaret read it and had to sit down. If the territorial governor sees this, he will see it, along with every newspaper editor I can reach. "Abigail," Margaret's voice was careful, "there are people in this town who signed that petition. People with families. If Mercer decides to go after all of them, the way he went after Tom, he can't. He burned 1 store. If he burns 11, he doesn't have a town left. And a sheriff without a town is just a man with a badge." "You're betting on his restraint?" "I'm betting on his greed. Mercer doesn't want to destroy Cedar Creek. He wants to own it. Destruction is expensive and attracts attention from Santa Fe. He'll try pressure, intimidation, but he won't burn it all." "And if you're wrong?" Abigail's pencil stopped moving. She looked at Margaret. "Then I'm wrong, and people get hurt, and it's my fault." Margaret covered Abigail's hand with her own. "It's not your fault, child. None of this is your fault. I organized them.
I asked them to sign. Their names are on that petition because I put the paper in front of them. Their names are on that petition because they chose to sign. Nobody held a gun. Nobody made promises. You gave them a chance, and they took it. That's not guilt.
That's leadership. Abigail pulled her hand away. Not roughly, gently. The way you pull away from comfort when you're not sure you deserve it. I need to finish writing, she said. Margaret nodded and left her alone. Caleb came by at sunset. He stood in the doorway and watched her work. Her hand moved across the paper with a kind of furious precision that made him think of a surgeon. Every cut necessary, nothing wasted. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "I'm not hungry." "That wasn't what I asked." She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, from focus. "Caleb, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been writing since noon, and you haven't moved from that chair." "This is how I fight. You fight with fences and cattle and your hands. I fight with this." She held up the pencil. "Let me fight." He sat down across from her. Didn't speak. Didn't leave. Just sat there, the way he'd described sitting next to men in the war who couldn't figure out why they'd survived. Sometimes standing next to someone is the only thing that keeps them from falling. After a while, Abigail set the pencil down. "He came to the boarding house again last night," she said. "Mercer? He didn't just stand outside this time. He knocked." Every muscle in Caleb's body went tight. "What did he say?" "Margaret answered. He asked to speak with me. She told him it was 11 o'clock at night, and no respectable caller comes at that hour. He said it wasn't a social call. It was official business." "What kind of official business?" "He wanted to offer me a deal." Caleb's hands curled on the table. "What deal?" "He said if I withdrew the petition and left Cedar Creek on the next train, he'd drop all charges and pay my fare east, first class." "And?" "And he said if I didn't, things would get more difficult. Not for me, for the people around me." He looked at Margaret when he said it. "He threatened Margaret?" "He didn't use the word threat. He never does. He said difficult. He said complicated. He said unfortunate." Men like Mercer have a whole vocabulary for violence that never includes the word. Caleb stood up. His chair scraped the floor. "Where are you going?" "To have a conversation with Mercer." "No." "He threatened Margaret." "He implied something about Margaret. And if you go to him now, angry, armed, ready for a fight, he wins. He arrests you for threatening an officer. He removes you from the equation. And I lose the only person in this town willing to stand next to me." Caleb stopped. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat on the table. "I can't just sit here." "Yes, you can. You can sit here and you can trust me. That's what I need from you right now. Not your gun, not your fists. Your trust." He looked at her. She looked at him. The space between them was 3 feet of kitchen table, and it felt like the width of everything that mattered. "I trust you," he said. "Then sit down." He sat. "The petition is already sent," she said. "Mercer can't unsend it. The documents I'm writing tonight will go with the next mail coach. He can't stop the mail without committing a federal crime. And every day that passes, more people in this town see what he is. Seeing and acting are 2 different things." "They are, but seeing comes first. You can't fight what you won't look at." She picked up the pencil again. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "The offer he made. The first-class ticket east." "What about it?" "For about 30 seconds, I thought about taking it." His chest tightened. "Not because I wanted to leave, because I was tired and scared. And I thought about what would happen if I stayed and everything went wrong
and people got hurt because of me." She paused. 30 seconds. That's how long it lasted. What happened after 30 seconds? I thought about the depot, about you putting that coin on the counter, about Mercer laughing. And I thought, if I leave, he laughs again, and nobody ever stops him. So you stayed. I stayed, not for you, not for Margaret, for the 11 people who put their names on a piece of paper because I told them it would matter. She went back to writing. Caleb watched her. And something in him, something deep and old and carefully buried beneath years of solitude and fence-mending and quiet survival, shifted. Not toward desire, not toward need, toward something bigger than both, toward the certainty that this woman was going to change everything, and the terrifying hope that he might be part of it. 3 days later, Rebecca Sloane's well went dry. Not naturally. Someone had diverted the creek that fed it. The diversion was crude but effective. Rocks and timber piled upstream, redirecting water to Mercer's own property. Caleb rode out with Tom Avery to see it. They stood on the bank and looked at the blockage, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "He's picking us off," Tom said, "one by one. Store. Well, what's next? Someone's barn? Someone's herd? He's testing us, seeing if we break." "Tom, are you breaking?" Avery looked at the dry creek bed where Rebecca Sloane's children used to play. "No, but I'm getting close." "Close is close. It's not fair." They cleared the blockage together. Took 4 hours of hauling rock in the midday heat. By the time the water ran again, both men were drenched in sweat and exhausted. "Caleb," Tom said, breathing hard, "how long can we keep this up? He breaks, we fix. He breaks again, we fix again. He's got the whole town working for him. We've got 11 names and a school teacher." 12 names. "What?" "Billy Dawson signed yesterday. And his mother. That's 13. Tom looked at him. "Dawson's mother? She's 70 years old." "She said she's been waiting 6 years for someone to stand up to Mercer. Said she'd sign in blood if we asked." Something changed in Tom's face. Not hope, exactly. Something harder and more practical than hope. The look of a man doing math and realizing the numbers might be shifting. "How many do we need?" "For the territorial office to act?" "Abigail says 20 signatures, plus documented evidence of corruption." "We've got 13 signatures and a burned store, a quarantine fraud, cut fences, and a diverted creek. And a woman who writes everything down." Tom almost smiled. "She's something, that woman." "She is." "You in love with her?" Caleb looked away, then looked back. "That's not what this is about." "Didn't answer my question." "Didn't intend to." Tom laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed since the fire. That evening, Caleb brought the news to Abigail. 13 signatures. More evidence. Rebecca Sloane willing to testify about the well. Abigail listened, nodded, wrote it all down. Then she stopped. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." "All right." "The mail coach that was supposed to carry my documents to Santa Fe. It never arrived at the next station." His blood went cold. "What?" "Billy checked at the telegraph office. The coach left Cedar Creek on schedule, but it didn't arrive in Albuquerque. It's either delayed, lost, or intercepted." "Mercer." "Possibly, or just bad roads and summer storms. I don't know." "The petition, is it?" "The original petition went with the first mail coach 2 weeks ago. It arrived. I confirmed that. But the evidence file, the documentation of everything since, was on the second coach. If Mercer intercepted it, then he has our names, our evidence, our strategy. He already knows our names. He saw who came to Margaret's house. But the evidence, that's different. That's the weapon. You made copies. I made copies. They're here. But I need a way to get them to Santa Fe that doesn't involve the mail coach. Caleb thought for a long moment. I'll ride it myself. That's 4 days each way. 8 days total. You can't leave the ranch for 8 days. I'll ask Tom to watch the cattle. And who watches Cedar Creek? Who watches Margaret? Who watches... She stopped herself. Who watches me? Margaret's got a shotgun, and she knows how to use it. That's not what I'm asking, and you know it. He did know. She wasn't asking about safety. She was asking about presence. About the thing that happens when the one person holding the line walks away. Then we find another way, he said. There is no other way. The telegraph is controlled by Mercer. The mail coach is compromised. The only route is a rider. Then I ride. And I come with you. Absolutely not. I know the documents better than anyone. If we reach the territorial office, I can present the case in person. That carries more weight than paper. The ride is dangerous. Summer heat. No water for 40 miles between here and Albuquerque. Bandits on the southern route. I crossed the entire country alone on a train to marry a dead man. I think I can handle a horse. You fell off twice. And got back on 3 times. I already told you the math. Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. And the argument ended the way most arguments with Abigail Hart ended. With her winning, and him knowing she was right. We leave at dawn, he said. We leave at midnight. Mercer watches the roads during the day. Midnight? Margaret will tell people I'm ill, confined to bed. That buys us 2 days before anyone checks. You've already planned this. I planned it 3 days ago. I was waiting for you to agree. He shook his head. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. Stubborn is just brave with better planning. He laughed. She didn't. She was already packing. Margaret helped them prepare without a word of protest. She packed food, water, a bedroll, and a small pistol she'd kept since her husband died. I've never fired it, Margaret said, handing it to Abigail. I hope I don't have to. Hope's got nothing to do with it out there. Aim low. Don't hesitate. Abigail took the gun, held it like it weighed more than metal. At the door, Margaret pulled Caleb aside. Bring her back, she said. Whatever happens in Santa Fe, whatever the territorial office says, you bring that girl back to Cedar Creek. I will. And Caleb. Yeah? When this is over, and it will be over, one way or another, you tell her. Tell her what? Margaret gave him a look that made him feel 17 years old. You know what? He put on his hat. They rode out at midnight. 2 horses, 2 riders, and a leather satchel full of documents that could either save a town or prove that hope was just another word for foolishness. The desert was dark and vast and silent, and the stars pressed down so close it felt like you could reach up and close your hand around them. They didn't speak for the first hour. The horses found their rhythm. The night cooled the sweat of the day, and somewhere behind them, Cedar Creek slept under Mercer's shadow, not knowing that 2 of its people had slipped away, carrying the only weapon that mattered. Abigail broke the silence. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not trying to stop me. I tried. You didn't let me. For letting me not let you. He turned to look at her in the starlight. She sat the horse well, better than he'd expected. Her back was straight, and her hands were steady on the reins, and the leather folder was strapped across her chest like armor. Abigail. Yes? When we get to Santa Fe, and the territorial office reads those documents, and they send someone to deal with Mercer, if they send someone, when they send someone, what do you want to do after? She was quiet for a long time. The horses walked. The stars turned. I want to build a school, she said. In Cedar Creek, a real one, with walls and a roof and books and a bell that rings in the morning. That'll take money. It'll take people. The money follows the people. And where do you build it? She turned to look at him. In the dark, he couldn't see her expression. But he could hear her voice, and her voice sounded like a woman who'd finally stopped running from a future and started running toward one. On your land, she said, if you'll let me. His heart hit something in his chest that he'd forgotten was there. My land. The east pasture, near the creek. It's flat, it's got water, and it's far enough from town that Mercer can't touch it without crossing your property line. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about nothing else. He faced forward, swallowed hard, let the night carry the weight of what she'd just said. Then we build it, he said. Together. The word hung between them like a bridge neither of them had crossed yet. But it was there, solid, real, waiting. They rode south through the desert toward Santa Fe, and behind them, Cedar Creek grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. And all that was left was the dark and the stars, and two people carrying a town's future in a leather satchel, riding toward a dawn that hadn't broken yet, but was coming. It was coming. They reached Santa Fe on the third day. Abigail hadn't complained once. Not about the heat that pressed down like a furnace lid. Not about the saddle sores she tried to hide by shifting her weight every few minutes. Not about the water running low on the second afternoon when Caleb miscounted the distance between springs. She'd ridden in silence for hours at a stretch, and when she did speak, it was to rehearse. She ran through the case out loud, dates, names, statutes, evidence, as if the desert itself were a courtroom and the cactus were the jury. Caleb listened to every word. By the time they saw the first buildings of Santa Fe rising out of the heat shimmer, he could have argued the case himself. The territorial office was a squat adobe building on the plaza, sandwiched between a land claims office and a barber shop. Not impressive, not grand. Just a door with a sign that read, Office of the Territorial Governor, Administrative Division. Abigail dismounted, untied the leather satchel, and stood there for a moment. You all right? Caleb asked. I'm about to walk into a government office, covered in 3 days of trail dust, and ask them to remove a sheriff. I'm fine. You look like you've been dragged through the desert. I have been dragged through the desert. That's the point. We didn't ride 3 days for me to look comfortable. We rode 3 days because a man with a badge is terrorizing a town, and nobody else was willing to make this trip. She pushed open the door. The clerk behind the desk was a young man with spectacles and ink on his cuffs. He looked up, looked at Abigail, looked at the dust falling from her hem onto his clean floor, and frowned. Can I help you? I need to see the territorial administrator. My name is Abigail Hart. I represent 13 citizens of Cedar Creek who have filed a petition for municipal governance and wish to submit evidence of corruption by the acting sheriff. The clerk blinked. Do you have an appointment? I have a 3-day ride, a satchel full of sworn testimony, and a town that's burning while we stand here. Is the administrator in? The clerk looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back, offered nothing. 1 moment, the clerk said, and disappeared through a back door. He returned with a man named Hector Ruiz, mid-50s, dark suit, calm eyes that moved from Abigail to Caleb to the satchel with a kind of assessment that suggested he'd seen plenty of desperate people walk through that door, but not many who looked this certain. Miss Hart, I received your petition 3 weeks ago. I've been waiting for someone to follow up in person. Please, sit down. They sat. Abigail opened the satchel and began laying documents on his desk with the same precision she'd shown at the hearing. Letter by letter, testimony by testimony, date by date. Ruiz read in silence, turned pages, read more. His face gave nothing away. 15 minutes passed. 20. Caleb's knee bounced under the desk. Abigail sat perfectly still. Finally, Ruiz removed his spectacles and set them on top of the documents. Miss Hart, what you've presented here is serious. I know. A quarantine without medical basis, arson, water diversion, witness intimidation, misuse of vagrancy statutes. If even half of this is accurate, Sheriff Mercer has committed multiple violations of territorial law. All of it is accurate. Every statement is sworn. Every date is verified. I believe you. The problem isn't evidence. The problem is jurisdiction. Abigail's hands tightened in her lap. What do you mean? Cedar Creek doesn't have municipal status yet. Your petition is being processed, but until it's approved, Cedar Creek operates under county jurisdiction. The county sheriff is Mercer's cousin. Caleb leaned forward. You're saying the man who's supposed to hold Mercer accountable is family? I'm saying the normal channels won't work. Frank Mercer, the county sheriff, has received complaints about Doyle before. They go nowhere. Abigail's face went white, then red, then controlled. Mr. Ruiz, I did not ride 3 days through the desert to be told the system can't help us. I didn't say the system can't help you. I said the normal channels won't work. There are other channels. He pulled a sheet of paper from his desk drawer. The territorial governor has the authority to appoint a special investigator when there's evidence of systemic corruption at the local level. It bypasses county jurisdiction entirely. But it requires the governor's personal authorization, and Governor Wallace is not an easy man to reach. Then help us reach him. Ruiz studied her, the way a man studies a bridge before deciding whether it'll hold his weight. I'll forward your file to the governor's office today, with my personal recommendation that an investigator be appointed. That's the most I can do from this desk. How long? 4 to 6 weeks. We don't have 4 to 6 weeks. Mercer burned a store. He diverted water. He locked women in a boarding house. By the time your investigator arrives, there may not be a town left. Miss Hart, people trusted me. They signed their names because I told them the system would protect them. If I go back and tell them to wait 6 more weeks while Mercer picks them off one by one. Her voice cracked. She caught it, held it. Caleb put his hand on the back of her chair, not touching her, just there. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Then he opened another drawer and pulled out a second document. There is one more option. It's faster, but it's riskier. Tell me. A territorial restraining order. I can issue one from this office based on the evidence you've presented. It would prohibit Mercer from taking any official action against the petition signers until the investigation is complete. If he violates it, he's subject to immediate arrest by territorial marshals. Then issue it. If I do, Mercer will know the territorial office is watching. He may back down, or he may escalate before the order reaches Cedar Creek. I can't control what happens in those days between. How many days? The order takes effect when it's served. I can send a rider tomorrow. 3 days to Cedar Creek. 3 days, Abigail looked at Caleb. We left 3 days ago. Mercer's had 3 days without us there. Caleb's stomach turned. Margaret's there, he said. Tom, Billy. Margaret is 63 years old, with a pistol she's never fired. Ruiz held up a hand. I'll issue the restraining order within the hour. My rider will leave at dawn. But Miss Hart, I need you to understand something. This is not a guarantee. It's a piece of paper. It has power only if people with guns choose to honor it. I know what paper can do, Mr. Ruiz. I've staked everything on it. He nodded, picked up his pen, started writing. Abigail stood, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the glass. Caleb followed. "Hey," he said quietly. 3 days. He's had 3 days to do whatever he wants. Margaret's tough. Margaret's human, and she's protecting 11 people who put their trust in a woman who left town in the middle of the night. You didn't leave. You came here. For them. I left. That's what they'll see. That's what Mercer will tell them. And when you come back with a territorial order in your hand, that's what they'll remember. She turned from the window. Her eyes were wet. She wiped them with the back of her hand, fast, angry, the same way she'd done at the hearing. Caleb, I need to ask you something. Ask. If we get back, and Mercer has done something bad, something irreversible, to Margaret or Tom or anyone who signed that petition, will you blame me? No. Don't answer that fast. Think about it. I don't need to think about it. I knew what I was doing when I put that coin on the counter. Same as you knew what you were doing when you wrote that petition. We chose this, both of us. And whatever happens, it's Mercer's fault, not yours. She looked at him for a long time, the longest she'd ever looked at him without speaking. You mean that, she said. I don't say things I don't mean. Haven't got the energy for it. She almost laughed. Almost. Then she wiped her eyes one more time, straightened her shoulders, and walked back to Ruiz's desk. How soon can we leave? You just arrived. And our town is 3 days away with no protection. How soon? Ruiz finished writing, stamped the document, held it up for the ink to dry. My rider leaves at dawn. You can ride with him if you want. He knows a faster route through the Sandia Pass. Cuts half a day. We'll take it. They left Santa Fe at first light with Ruiz's rider, a quiet man named Vasquez, who rode like he was part of the horse and didn't waste words on anything that wasn't directions or water. The return trip was faster. Vasquez knew shortcuts through the passes that shaved hours off the journey. They rode hard, stopped only when the horses needed rest, slept in shifts. On the second night, camped in a dry wash between 2 ridges, Abigail couldn't sleep. Caleb found her sitting with the leather satchel in her lap, staring at nothing. You should rest, he said. I keep thinking about Margaret. She's tougher than both of us. She's braver than both of us. There's a difference. Tough means you can take a hit. Brave means you take the hit knowing it's coming. She turned to him. Caleb, when we get back, when this is settled, when Mercer is dealt with and the town council is formed and the school is built, when all of it is done. Yeah? I need you to know that everything I feel for you is real. It's not gratitude. It's not proximity. It's not a woman clinging to the first man who showed her kindness. His heart stopped, restarted. I know, he said. No, you don't. You hope, but you don't know, because I haven't said it, and I need to say it before we ride back into whatever's waiting. Because if something goes wrong, I refuse to let the unsaid things be the thing I regret. She set the satchel down. I love you. Not because you saved me, because you didn't try to. You offered me a ticket, a room, a job, a partnership. At every step, you gave me choices instead of answers. Do you understand how rare that is? For a woman? From a man? Caleb couldn't speak. His throat was closed. Every man I've ever known, my father excluded, told me what I needed, what I should want, what was best for me. You're the first one who ever asked. Abigail, I'm not finished. Her voice was fierce and tender at the same time, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. I love you. And when this is over, I want to build that school on your land. And I want to build a life with you. Not behind you, not beneath you, beside you, if that's something you want. The desert was silent. Vasquez was asleep or pretending to be. The stars were thick enough to read by. Caleb reached across the space between them and took her hand. He held it the way you hold something you've been looking for so long you'd forgotten you were searching. Abigail Hart, he said, I've been alone for 15 years. Not because I wanted to be, because I couldn't find anyone worth the risk of not being alone. You walked off a train with nothing, and within 2 weeks you took on a sheriff, organized a town, rode across a desert, and made me read Shakespeare. She laughed, a real laugh, quiet and choked and perfect. I love you, he said, and I don't want to rescue you. I don't want to own you. I don't want to protect you from the world. I want to build with you, whatever that looks like, for as long as you'll have me. She squeezed his hand so hard his knuckles ached. Then build with me, she said. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle, brief, like a promise made with lips instead of words. Now get some sleep, she whispered. We've got a town to save tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. They rode into Cedar Creek on the afternoon of the third day, and the first thing Caleb saw was Margaret Hale standing on the porch of her boarding house with a shotgun across her lap. His heart seized. Margaret! She looked up, squinted against the sun. Then her face broke open. Lord Almighty, you're alive! What happened? Mercer happened. He came the night after you left, tried to padlock the boarding house again. I told him to try it and see what happened. She patted the shotgun. He reconsidered. Is everyone safe? Everyone's standing. Tom Avery's been sleeping in his burned store with a rifle. Rebecca Sloan moved her children to the Phelps Ranch. Billy Dawson's been riding between properties every night, checking on the signers. Abigail dismounted and ran to Margaret, threw her arms around her. Margaret held on with one arm. The other kept the shotgun. I thought he'd hurt you, Abigail said. He tried to scare me. Scaring and hurting aren't the same thing. I've been scared before. It didn't kill me then, and it won't kill me now. Margaret, we brought something. Vasquez dismounted. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the territorial restraining order, sealed and stamped. Margaret looked at it, read it slowly. Her lips moved with the words. This says he can't touch us. It says if he touches any petition signer, territorial marshals will arrest him. And who serves this? Vasquez stepped forward. I do, ma'am. Territorial authority. Margaret looked at him, looked at the badge on his vest she hadn't noticed before. Well, she said. Well, well. Mercer was served within the hour. Vasquez walked into the sheriff's office, placed the document on his desk, and stated the terms in a voice loud enough that the deputy outside heard every word. Mercer read it. His face went through colors Caleb had never seen on a human being. Red, white, something close to purple. This is a mistake, Mercer said. It's a territorial order, Sheriff, signed by Administrator Ruiz and authorized by the governor's office. Any action taken against petition signers will result in your immediate removal and arrest. On whose authority? The territory of New Mexico, which, last I checked, outranks your badge. Mercer stood, slowly, the way a man stands when the ground he's been standing on turns out to be thinner than he thought.
"This isn't over," he said. "For your sake," Vasquez replied, "I'd recommend it be over." Caleb watched from across the street. Abigail stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The restraining order didn't remove Mercer. It didn't fix the burned store or the diverted creek or the months of fear. But it drew a line. A legal, territorial, inarguable line. And for the first time in 6 years, Doyle Mercer was on the wrong side of it. Within a week, 3 more families signed the petition. Then 5. Then 8. Within a month, Cedar Creek had 27 signatures and a formal request for municipal incorporation sitting on the governor's desk. The territorial investigator arrived 6 weeks later. A federal marshal named Colton, who spent 3 days interviewing citizens, reviewing Abigail's meticulous records, and walking the ground where Tom's store had stood and where Rebecca's creek had been blocked. He arrested Mercer on a Thursday morning. No gunfight, no standoff. Just a man with a federal warrant and a pair of handcuffs walking into the sheriff's office at 8 a.m. Mercer went quietly, not because he'd accepted defeat, but because he finally understood that the thing he'd feared most, paper, records, the slow and patient machinery of law, had caught up with him, and no amount of badges or bullying could outrun it. The town elected its first council that fall. Margaret Hale was voted chair. Tom Avery was treasurer. Abigail Hart was appointed to a newly created position, Director of Education for the Cedar Creek Municipal District. Caleb wasn't on the council. He didn't want to be. He had cattle to tend and a fence that needed mending, and a woman who needed a schoolhouse built before winter. He proposed on the day they laid the foundation. Not with a ring, he didn't have one. He knelt in the dirt beside the first cornerstone of what would become the Hart-Turner Schoolhouse and looked up at her. "I don't want to rescue you," he said. "I want to build with you." She knelt beside him, put her hands on the stone. "Then build with me." They married in Margaret's kitchen on a Sunday. Margaret cried. Tom Avery was the witness. Billy Dawson rang the church bell so hard it could be heard 3 valleys over. The school opened the following spring. 14 students, 1 room. A chalkboard Caleb built from pine planks. Books that Abigail ordered from Philadelphia, with money the town council raised at a dance where Tom Avery played the fiddle so badly that Margaret threatened to arrest him for crimes against music. 20 years passed. Cedar Creek grew. Not fast, not grand, but steady and real, the way things grow when they're built on something solid. The Hart-Turner Schoolhouse became 2 rooms, then 4, then a proper building with a bell tower and a library. Abigail taught every child who walked through the door, ranch children, town children, children who rode 3 hours each way because there was no other school within 50 miles. Caleb's ranch doubled, then tripled. He hired hands, bought more land, became the kind of man other ranchers came to for advice. Not because he was the richest, but because he was the most honest. They had 3 children. A son named James, after the dead man whose letter had brought Abigail west. A daughter named Margaret, after the woman who'd opened her door. And a younger son named Thomas, after the man who'd stood in front of his burning store and refused to quit. Margaret Hale lived to see 81. She died in the boarding house she'd run for 40 years, with Abigail holding one hand and Caleb holding the other. The town closed every shop for her funeral, even the saloon. Tom Avery rebuilt his mercantile, bigger, better, with a sign out front that read, "Avery and Sons, established twice." Mercer served 4 years in territorial prison. When he got out, he left New Mexico and was never heard from again. His name faded from Cedar Creek the way smoke fades from a room.
Slowly, then all at once. On a summer evening 30 years after a woman with no ticket stepped off a train, Abigail sat on the porch of the house Caleb had built her. Not the old ranch house with its leaking roof. A new one, solid, with bookshelves in every room and a view of the schoolhouse from the kitchen window. Caleb sat beside her. His hair was silver now. His hands were thick with decades of work. But his eyes were the same, steady, patient, watching her the way he'd watched her since the depot. Their granddaughter was reading on the porch steps, 7 years old, dark hair, her mother's stubbornness and her grandfather's calm. "Grandma," the girl said without looking up, "what was it like when you first came here?" Abigail looked at the schoolhouse, at the town beyond it, at the road where a train station still stood, though the depot had been rebuilt twice. "It was hot," she said, "and I was scared. And a man I'd never met put a gold coin on a counter for a woman he'd never seen." "Why?" "Because he believed that kindness was worth the cost." "Was it?" Abigail looked at Caleb. He looked at her. 30 years of building and fighting and teaching and loving passed between them in a single glance. "Every penny," she said. The girl went back to her book. Caleb reached over and took Abigail's hand. She let him, the way she always did now, not as a woman being held, but as a woman choosing to hold on. "You still miss the East?" he asked. The same question he'd asked 100 times, 1,000. She smiled, the same smile from that night in the desert when she'd told him she loved him. Older now, deeper, but the same. "No," she said, "I don't miss the life I was assigned. I chose this one." The evening settled over Cedar Creek. The schoolhouse bell caught the last light. Children's voices drifted from somewhere down the road. And on the porch of a house built by hands that had chosen each other, two people sat together in a silence that held everything. Every gold coin, every burned store, every petition signed in lamplight, every mile of desert crossed, every word spoken and unspoken, every single act of courage that had turned a lawless town into a home. One act of kindness built a town. One brave choice built a future. And Abigail Hart, who had arrived with nothing, who had been laughed at and threatened and cornered and underestimated, had built both. Not alone, never alone, but on her own terms, always on her own terms.